Wraparound Initiative and the National Wraparound Implementation Center. I am Celeste Seibel, and I am a co-investigator for the Achieve My Plan training projects, lead trainer, and I'm also part of the Pathways Research and Training Center. And I have Mary Beth Welch with us as well today, and she's a peer support trainer specialist with Pathways RTC. And our other colleague, Caitlin Baird, can't be here today. She is sick with strep throat, so she is unable to join us, but she helped in building the presentation, and she's a care coordinator training specialist and works at Pathways RTC. And I'm going to turn it over to Janet, and she's going to get us started with the agenda.
Thanks, Celeste, and hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar. I'm very pleased to be here today because I have the chance to talk simultaneously about several of my favorite topics. So just briefly, here's what we're going to cover today. We're going to start out with a little review of the rationale of why we need practice for youth and young adults that's relevant for them, that's effective with them, and that's attractive and engaging. And then cover the key elements of that kind of approach. Then we're going to shift gears a little bit and talk about the training approach and why, what can we do to make sure that once we've identified the skills that people need in order to deliver these new practices, what are the attributes of a good training approach. And then we're going to describe how we have actually been able to implement those elements of what we call the gold standard of training with our own intervention, AMP, or Achieve My Plan, and a VCP, which stands for the Virtual Coaching Platform, which is our remote training, kind of the main mechanism by which we deliver our remote training and coaching. Then we're going to talk about evaluation findings from one of our training projects and get to your questions at the end. Next, please. So again, as I mentioned, over, I would say, maybe the last 10 years, there's been a growing attention to the need for practices that will engage older youth and young adults. We know that this is a population with the highest level of mental health needs and also the population that is least likely to engage in mental health services. And so what we did a few years ago, this was published, as you can see, in 2015, was a review to look at what was known about what works for this population. And so we went out to try to find everything we could from research reports, from reviews, and from expert consensus statements. So there would be a convening of experts to kind of come up with their best thinking about what would be the best practices most likely to work with young people. And it's definitely true that there is not a lot of research focusing specifically on effectiveness of kinds of interventions for this population, but there is some. And what there is, and including going across these different sources, so beyond just the research, is quite a lot of consensus about what seems to be most promising. And my kind of take on all of this is that part of it is that once you have young people who are free to choose whether to attend services or not, that they are likely to attend services that feel engaging and supportive to them. And so that kind of means that that the practices that work for them kind of have to cater to their preferences. So what we find when we look across these different sources of information about what works or likely to work with the population is that almost universally they're based in sort of a person-centered approach, and typically with a person-centered kind of transition planning approach that's very much supposed to be founded on the young person's perspective. That these approaches are intended to be strengths-based, so incorporating building on strengths, recognizing strengths, etc. That they are intended to build connections to positive people and community contexts, or in other words, people and organizations, institutions, etc. in the community that are supportive of the young person's own long-term goals for themselves. That also these are approaches that support skill building. Typically this includes self-determination skills, so those are skills for creating those plans, and that's part of the person-centered planning process. So they're the skills that kind of go along with that, including things like figuring out what you want to do and how do you go about accomplishing the goals that you have. And then also skills that are needed to function in the relationships and contexts that young people, as they transition out into the world, want to be a part of, and that will help them, again, in terms of pursuing their long-term goals and aspirations. Next, please. So again, why might we need to enhance practice? I think in a certain way this is a fairly familiar list of things that characterize these approaches, but we also know there's quite a bit of research on the fact that these things are a little harder to do than it might appear on the surface. And we know generally there are lots and lots of interventions across human services that are sort of supposed to be founded on some kind of person-centered approach. And we also know that there's a fairly general and well documented in the research critique that person-centered processes really are not clearly defined, that often they sort of lack structure and definition, which makes them very hard to implement in a quality way. So that's obviously one area where practice could be strengthened. Specifically regarding youth and young adults, there's also quite a bit of research documenting that even where there's supposed to be person-centered planning, that these planning processes are not necessarily deeply rooted in the perspectives of the young people themselves. And so we have a series of research studies from transition age youth for IEP, planning in schools, in systems of care, and in wraparound, and that research goes up to ages sometimes in 21 or 24. So we know that that's not only a difficulty that is in the sort of older school age or transitioning from high school population, but also in the young adult population as well. And we also have some research indicating that professionals themselves don't feel that they really have the skills to engage young people and to support their active participation in a youth-led or young adult-led planning process. And so there's also some evidence that these can be improved at fairly low cost, and that's part of what we're going to talk about today. Next, please. So just very briefly, you know, what is to be gained from all of this? We know that voice and choice is the first principle of person-centered planning, so without that youth-led or youth-driven approach, you can't really be doing person-centered planning. But we also know that when people have choice about what they get to do, and this is true of young people no less than the population generally, of in services, out of services, anywhere, that people are more motivated to do things and are more persistent in following up on things when they feel that they have chosen whether to engage in an activity or not. Specifically with youth and young adults, this research also applies to them certainly, and also that they feel, if they feel that they are coerced into doing something, maybe not surprisingly, kind of the opposite is true, that they will kind of be resistant to complying with what they're being told to do. For young people, working in a self-determined way with a team and providers should promote better tailoring of services and supports that reflect what the youth or young adult wants to do and that fits with what they need, what they feel they need and are motivated to engage in. And increased engagement really ought to result in a higher kind of motivation to attend regularly, to engage with services, or in other words, what we think of as kind of a higher dose of that intervention. And finally, this is something that's borne out in our own research, that when young people are working in a self-determined way with their team and providers and helping to, you know, determine what the priorities of therapy or a planning process will be, that results in a better alliance with the goals and purposes of other providers or team members. Okay, next please. And again, we know that for young people who are in this stage of life, learning to make their plans and achieve their goals is a very important developmental task. So they're moving out of contexts where they were maybe being supported by parents or other authority figures who are kind of doing more of the deciding, but obviously as you move out to become an adult, that's responsibility falls more and more on you. And we do know that young people who have been engaged in systems often have not had the opportunity to develop self-determination skills to the extent that other young people have, either because of perhaps they have maybe some kinds of risky behaviors that bring down consequences that are somewhat coercive on them, or perhaps they are just surrounded by people who fear for their well-being, and that can sometimes make us be more kind of trying to advise or control their behavior, and sometimes they're just involved in systems like foster cares that have so many rules and regulations that often results in a very compliance-oriented experience for young people. But we do know that young people who are more self-determined have better outcomes post-transition. And so it's not just the correlation there, but we even have some studies that young people who participate in self-determination curriculum as they are exiting high school have a variety of better outcomes in those studies on areas all the way from kind of general well-being to earning more money to living more independently. We know generally that people who are more self-determined are more likely to persevere in the face of goals and obstacles, and we know that they are also specifically more likely to change health habits and sustain them. And then if we're thinking about obviously making those connections to positive relationships and context, that one of the important things about connecting people to positive contexts is it's motivating to them to acquire this skill so that they can function in those contexts. So for example, someone has an aspiration to go to community college, then that is very inspiring for them to learn how to become organized, to show up places on time, to develop study skills, etc. Similarly, if they're linked to a place of employment, they are motivated to keep that job, to acquire those skills, and so on. So it's kind of self-reinforcing. Okay, so next please. So this is kind of, that was all sort of by way of introducing the need for new training approaches to help providers understand how to work, at least to our knowledge, what is most likely to be effective with the population. So I want to just kind of take a little bit of a step back and talk about training effectiveness. And this is a slide I like to use. You can see it's 2003. It's a little bit old, and it's also actually that was done based on an accumulation of studies in education. But I like it anyway. I think that a lot of similar things happen between training and kind of performance of new practice in education as compared to our kind of our normal mental health context, where the question is, you know, how do we get, in this case, teachers, or in our case, the mental health providers of various kinds, to actually not just learn about a skill, but to be able to actually execute it and to change so that they are doing something different when they're with their young people or their clients, or however you want to describe the relationship. So basically what this is showing, if you look at the blue bars, that knowledge about that's a certain intervention or practice can be communicated to people in a theory context. So if you just sort of describe to them what they should be doing, they can give you a little bit of information about it, and they can, in that, in say the training context, they can maybe demonstrate that skill. So what we're looking at just generally here is across the bottom is starting with, if you're just sort of exposed to some information about a practice, then if you take that and then the next set of bars over, if you add a demonstration to it, and then if you add the opportunity to practice, so a trainee is now practicing the skill in a controlled environment, so usually that would be the training environment, and then get some feedback, again this would be in the training environment, and then finally if you add in coaching, which is the opportunity to have someone watch them do the practice in the actual, in this case, classroom environment, or in our case, we're thinking about a practice environment, what is the impact on knowledge, skill, and practice change? So if we look across the blue in the bottom, oh, and up on the left-hand side is what we call an effect size of new practice of transfer. So in human services, what we want to see, I mean, a nice large impact is something approaching 1 in terms of effect size. So if we look at just a training that is just communicating kind of theory about how to do something new, we see that we're not really getting much in the way of even knowledge about the practice, which isn't surprising because just on hearing something doesn't mean that you'll be able to describe effectively that new practice. But that with the demonstration and then the opportunity to practice, people become pretty good at describing what the practice is about and what it might look like. Although you can see that still the skill in performing the practice isn't approaching that kind of higher level of impact, or that effect size of 1, until you get feedback on your practice. And so that means that, you know, after adding all those elements within the training context, people can do the practice. But if you see that the orange bar still there has really not budged too much until you get coaching that involves that level of opportunity to be observed in the actual practice setting and get some feedback on your practice as you're trying to do it with actual people that you're trying to intervene with. So if we look at the next slide, then this is sort of a confirmation of this when we look at the training research literature, and in this case now I'm really focusing on mental health training, that what people refer to as kind of the gold standard, what it really takes to get practice change in mental health and related human services, it kind of requires these elements, and it's really reinforcing what was in the last slide that we saw with the orange bars, that this sort of optimal training experience requires that the person, the trainee, be observed, and that can be live or via some kind of audio or video recording, that the person receive feedback, and that certain kind of caveats around that feedback. One is that it's very clearly connected to the intervention theory, but also that it's based on objective criteria, or in other words, that the feedback system is reliable. And what that means is that if 2 different coaches or trainers were to watch the same person doing their practice, that the feedback that was provided would be the same from both people, or very similar, reliably similar. And that's really important so that people understand that they're kind of that they have a feeling that the people who are coaching them are credible, and also that they're getting consistent messages from different people. And then finally, that there is sort of a repetition of this loop of observation and feedback until the person who is being trained can demonstrate that they meet certain basic practice benchmarks. So why this is important? I think that it's probably not surprising to people to know that observation is a really important part of a good high-quality training and coaching experience. But I think it's very interesting that we don't hear a lot about exactly why. In psychology, generally, there was an original study that was done in right around 2000, and the original study was called Unskilled and Unaware of It: How Difficulties in Recognizing One's Own Incompetence Lead to Inflated Self-Assessments. And since that time, this follow-up study, which was published just a couple years ago, which was somewhat more succinctly titled, but similarly, Why Incompetents Think They're Awesome. It basically it's a little flip in terms of the title, but it's a very serious phenomenon that means that people who are novice at something or who are unskilled are very poor judges of their own practice. And given the extent to which in our field supervision and also a lot of consultation that people receive about their practice is really relied usually almost 100% on their own reports about their practice. And what we know, just looking down the bullets here from hundreds of studies that were based around the original Dunning-Kruger research, is that people who are novice do not recognize their own lack of skill. They don't recognize skill in other people, so they're poor judges of other skill. And that, however, that once they are actually exposed to formal training in that skill, then they become able to recognize and acknowledge kind of where they more realistically are as far as their development of expertise. Interestingly, experts also tend to underestimate their competence and believe that things that are easy for them are actually just easy, and sort of undervaluing the effort and development that it took for them to acquire the expertise that they have. So all of that is sort of by way of noting how important it is that though that element of coaching that includes observation really has to be there, and also acknowledging that most of the training, at least certainly of all of the kinds of mental health contexts that I'm familiar with, really doesn't include much in the way of that structured observation and reliable feedback. So why not? Well, it's completely understandable. I think that when we look at these gold standard elements, they can be very expensive to implement. I think people who are familiar with evidence-based practices, if you're implementing one of those, they kind of come with a package of expectations that the training and coaching will more or less match that gold standard that we've been talking about. But at the same time, we know that EBPs are really difficult to sustain. And this is a study that's actually just came out a couple months ago. It's not even in the actual printed journal yet. It's online first. But showed that when they looked at, let's see, what was it, 5 evidence-based practices in 58 sites across a bunch of states. They studied it longitudinally, so over time they went back to see how things were going, and they found that fewer than half of them made it to the 6-year point. And that's in itself is just a little bit startling, but especially when you consider not just the big investment that it takes up front, that probably the initial installation of an evidence-based practice is itself a 2-year process. So these EBPs are really not hanging in there too long. And anecdotally, and in a lot of these studies, there are a few studies looking at it more systematically, but cost turns out to be one of the top barriers. And it's interesting that there aren't really that many studies, although I hope there will be more soon, that are really looking at how much does it cost to sustain these evidence-based practices. And this was a study of just one evidence-based practice. It was trauma-focused CBT, and they looked at a bunch of agencies and found that the mean total 1-year cost to the agency was $65,000. And that included a lot of stuff. I think that's kind of a high figure. But even if you cut it in half, that's still quite a bit for agencies to be paying. And the cost per client, similarly, they were close to $2,000, which is a lot. So obviously that, to my mind, speaks to certainly what I'm familiar with anecdotally, which is people saying, it's really difficult to find ways, the time, the resources to do that kind of gold standard training that we know is really optimal for getting people to do things differently. So we are going to describe a little bit about an intervention that we've developed here in how we are now training for that using an exclusively remote coaching and training approach that we think compares in a cost way quite favorably to traditional training approaches. So very briefly, the Achieve My Plan enhancement is intended to be an intervention that increases the extent to which young people are meaningfully participated in treatment planning for intensive services. It's an approach called wraparound. It's basically an interdisciplinary team that comes together to try to coordinate a comprehensive set of services for a young person with very high level of mental health and related needs. And our Achieve My Plan, if you remember back to the beginning when we had those elements kind of that were I was discussing about being very important or key for effective practices for youth and young adults. Those are very much integral to our approach that we're using with AMP. And what we did was we had a control trial where we had a group of young people who got RAP as usual and other young people who got RAP plus the Achieve My Plan intervention. And what we found was that findings strongly favored our intervention condition. And in fact, we did a webinar on this earlier in the year, which you can access online if you want. We also have the journal article is in kind of preprint, and we have the manuscript archived on our website, which you can access if you just go to the homepage of Pathways. So very briefly, next, what we found was with Wraparound Plus, the enhancement, that young people, their active participation and engagement as rated by themselves, by the care coordinators, by their family and others, was higher in the intervention condition. And we videotaped the team meetings to show that young people were talking more. They were making more meaningful contributions during the team meeting, and that the team had more positive and fewer negative interactions. Young people also related their alliance with the providers on their team as being higher, and all team members were more satisfied and felt that the meeting was more productive. So in other words, we felt like we had a pretty successful trial of our AMP enhancement intervention. But the piece that I want to focus on today is that in the case of this randomized study, the AMP enhancement was delivered by university interns, and that includes both undergraduate and master's level interns, and that we train them in 6 weeks to deliver the intervention. So we were able to get them to have a significant impact in this fairly complicated service environment with 6 weeks of training, and we really credited that to our use of the virtual coaching platform. And just briefly, what we are trying to explore in our current work now is the use of our virtual coaching platform as a cost-effective way to provide gold standard training and coaching basically at the same price that people are paying for typical what I would refer to as kind of train and hope type approaches, where you train them and hope that they will be able to do that when they get back home to their training environment. So, kind of a comparable to sort of sending someone off for a week worth of training somewhere. We've been working on this for about 6 years. It's, I think, has obvious advantages in that it very much conforms to what we're thinking of as the gold standard. There are other challenges that perhaps we can talk about at the question period. I think it's not surprising that organizations trying to do something new find that there are barriers there. We have been using this with a number of different interventions within our own institute. The AMP that we did actually in the randomized study where we used the university interns, we're no longer doing that exact model anymore. So what we have now is a version of Achieve My Plan where we train care coordinators to enhance their wraparound practice. We have an amped up, and that's what we're mostly going to be talking about today, which is having care coordinators who are working with young people up to age 21. Then we have various other versions of AMP, as well as a peer-delivered version that we call AMP Plus, as well as several other interventions. So all of these we've been to one extent or another, installing our virtual coaching platform training into the approach. And as I mentioned today, we're going to be talking primarily about the amped up approach, which is where we were training care coordinators in wraparound to work more effectively with young people up to age 21. And I think with that, we are turning it over to Celeste and Mary Beth to talk about what the AMP training actually looks like.
Great, thank you, Janet. So we're going to shift gears a little bit and talk about our training approach. And so what that looks like is we have monthly video conferences, and what these video conferences cover are young adult engagement techniques, and we're going to show you what those are in the next slide, but that our training is really focused around how to engage meaningfully with a young person. We also cover AMP curriculum modules, and we discuss the theory of change, because as Janet was saying earlier, it's very important to link the theory to the practice. And then towards the end of the training, we focus on advanced skills, so maybe supporting a young person to make a decision, how to open a topic that's from your perspective while also being youth-driven, and then, you know, what to do when things don't go as planned, because we all know that can happen out in the field, and it's nice to have some time to think about what that might look like. So the AMP engagement techniques, these are the techniques that we are training the service providers how to use these techniques in their practice. And so we focus on how to actively listen to a young person, how to use open-ended questions and reflections in a way that kind of supports what the young person is saying and helps the young person to dig a little deeper around what they're thinking about or what they're sharing, maybe stitching together something that the young person had said in the past and bringing that back up in a way that's supportive to the young person and their growth, and maybe reminds them of previous ideas that they've had, or maybe different situations that they've overcome. Descriptive praise. So we think it's very important to assign or attach some description to the praise, that the young person knows what it is that we're acknowledging when we're giving them praise. Checking in and clarifying. So this is making sure that, number one, that the young person understands what it is that maybe we're working on in an AMP module, as well as checking in and clarifying that, that the service provider understands what the young person's saying and sharing. So it kind of goes both ways. Adapting, that's a big one. So, you know, adapting the curriculum in a way that makes sense for the young person. Normalizing, so maybe normalizing feelings, actions, experiences, behavior, so the young person feels less alone and understands what they might be feeling is totally normal. Another thing that is very important is labeling and skills promotion. And this is where we like to use the skills and techniques that the young person is working on, those self-determination skills, and label those so that they know what skill they're learning, or maybe what they're using, so they can start to attach that label, and it's easier for them to recall and notice when they're using those skills. Goldilocks effect, that is where you're helping the young person to identify the amount of support that's right for them, and also maybe in a way where they can take on a little more challenge, or, you know, take a healthy risk in a way that they feel supported to do so. And then finally, keeping it conversational. So how do you move through the curriculum and the modules in a way that feels really natural and conversational, and not clinical or sterile, or, dare I say, boring. So that's the hope with keeping it conversational. And just quickly, these are the AMP modules, and so this is the curriculum elements that we teach in the trainings. And just so you have a snapshot of what those look like, the first one is vision to activity, and that's supporting the young person to you know, identify a goal that they want to work on, and then how to narrow that down into concrete action steps, so they can take maybe a a larger goal that they have, and then figure out what they can start doing right away that's meaningful and is moving them towards their goal and in a way that's that they can take charge of. So it can just be very small steps. The next module is called Preparing for a Meeting, and this is supporting a young person to prepare for an upcoming meeting. This could be maybe a treatment planning meeting or a wraparound meeting or an individualized education plan meeting, but maybe it could also be something a little bit more casual, like a conversation with somebody, or maybe meeting someone out in the community about a volunteering opportunity, or signing up for a sports program or something like that. So this module is really focused on supporting a young person to have some kind of conversation. And the third module is a blend between both vision to activity and preparing for a meeting, and we call it Booster Check-In. And basically what the Booster Check-In is that's where we pull in that skill of adapting, and depending on where the young person's at, we maybe are checking in with them around how their activity is going, or maybe we're checking in around how one of their meetings went and what, how they felt supported, the outcome of the meeting, maybe planning next steps around that. So the booster is a mix between the two, depending on where the young person's at and how it's moving forward. Okay, and so this is the AMP training process. So now that you have a little bit of a snapshot of some of the content, this is the more focused around the training process. And so basically what we do is we will have a monthly video conference. So in that video conference, we'll cover one of the AMP modules. And so the service providers will have an opportunity to just learn about whatever the module is in an online learning type of environment. Then they'll also have a chance to observe, so they can log into our VCP website and watch an experienced coach doing that aspect of the module. So maybe an experienced coach is working with a young person around how to do vision to activity. And work with a young person to practice doing the module, and then they upload it to the VCP. Next, our team, we will review that video and look for strengths and improvables using the VCP. Oh, good. I got a thumbs up that you can hear me okay, so that's great. Hooray. Okay, so then the service provider will get feedback from us based on their video, and again, that's focused on strengths and improvables. And then what we do is then move on to the next module, and so then we do the next video conference, and we kind of follow the same process. So the idea is that throughout the 4 weeks or 6 weeks of training, that the service provider has an opportunity to digest the content in bite-sized pieces, and they have a chance to practice and observe throughout the training process. And we find that this is very valuable in terms of people's learning styles and getting the support that they need to see the practice change that Janet was talking about earlier. Okay, so this is just a screen grab from our VCP website. And this is what we see on our end, and I think oftentimes people want to see what it looks like, so we like to show this slide. But basically, on our end, we have the video. It's broken up into segments, and then we can start coding for the different things that we're seeing. So we're looking again for our themes and the techniques that the service provider is learning, and those little black boxes on the right, those are the comment boxes, and what's really handy about that is we can type in our comments around what we're seeing, so then, and then it's tied to that segment. So then when we send the service provider their feedback report, they can actually go back in and look at our comments and the exact segment that where that action was happening. And this is the feedback report, and what I really like about the feedback report is that we try to develop really thorough comments that usually include some kind of quote that the service provider has said, as well as some helpful suggestions or examples of what the service provider could do differently to maybe enhance their practice. And what is also really handy about it is, again, they can click on those blue hyperlinks on the left, and that's going to take them back to that segment in the video. So they can actually watch the action again and see it, you know, what exactly was happening in that moment that then generated that comment. And we use this feedback report as a way to share our feedback with the service provider, and the way that we do that is we do it over a telephone coaching call where a trainer and a service provider will talk through the feedback in the feedback report. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that feedback process in a moment. And just in case you're wondering, the VCP is very easy to use, and so this is just a screen grab from the site, but you'll notice that there's a little box that says upload a file, so it's very easy. It's a drag and drop kind of function that people can upload their videos in a secure way that's relatively easy to use. And there's also on the VCP website that all of the service providers who are doing the training, they have access to our clip library. And this is nice because this is where they can watch those example videos. And we also make targeted clips around specific actions that people can watch. So, for example, on this page, you might notice that these clips are focused on open-ended questions and reflections. So people can, the trainees can see what those actions are in those bite-sized moments. So if they wanted to see someone maybe doing a really skillful use of Goldilocks effect or something like that, they can use the clips to see that in action. Okay. So I think we've talked through most of these, but just briefly I'll go over them. So trainees can watch example videos through the VCP. They can also watch their own videos through VCP, which can be powerful to see your own practice. The trainee or the supervisor can clip interesting moments or interactions and share them with each other. And then, as we were talking about, the supervisor can also send the trainee their feedback report, which is linked with their comments. Okay, and now I'm going to turn it over to Mary Beth, and she's going to talk about the feedback process.
Hi, so the feedback process has a few different steps to it. You really want to make sure that you talk about different areas of strength that you're seeing, and also have examples for that. Same with areas for growth, which we always call them improvables. Examples are key for this too. And really work on clarifying any confusion about the curriculum, steps that are in the module that the trainee has been working on and did the video on. And then you kind of end with some overall feedback in areas for the trainee to focus on. It's also important to answer questions, discuss real-world implementation and stuff like that. So oftentimes when you're talking about like a strength that a trainee has, they can be kind of surprised by that, or like, oh really, like I did that right? So you really want to make sure you have examples for that. But then also there are times where they're like, okay, but I wasn't sure about this or that. And so really making time and space for those questions and having specific examples of this is what maybe I could do in that situation, or this is something you could do next time. Or even, you did this great. If you want to take that even further, here are some examples of how you can do that. So it's really important to kind of go really in depth. So this is the learning practice agreement. So like we said, we have the feedback report on VCP. This is available for people who kind of like a more like put together takeaway, but oftentimes we use the feedback report on VCP. This is just the more visual option as well. So things that go into being like our feedback, we really make sure that it's strengths-based, it's focused on growth, connected to the youth engagement techniques, so those are the things that were gone over earlier, and really is individualized, focusing on what that specific trainee is good at and growing in. So you're really wanting to help them grow their skills, obviously. So you don't want to be like, you have to do everything right immediately, you know. So you kind of start at the basic and you build on it over time. Yeah. Okay. So as they go through the training and like demonstrate their ability to like really do the AMP curriculum, you see them grow. They get certified in AMP after they're able to meet that competency, and then also takes a AMP certification quiz and score 80% or more.
Great, thank you. Okay, so we are going to turn it back over to Janet, who's going to talk us through some of our findings. Janet, I think you're muted.
Sorry, I think I unmuted myself in anticipation and then remuted myself by accident. So just to pick up again, this is based on a specific set of trainings that we had with the kind of amped up version of our AMP. We had about 40 participants in this training. So what we were able to take several different ways of looking at whether people were increasing their competencies. So, and you can see down the left here we have self-ratings that providers were giving kind of pre-training and post-training. And those areas match, if you remember back to the beginning when we were talking about those kind of key elements that are part of overall effective approaches for working with youth and young adults. So we see youth-driven, strengths, skills, connections, etc. So each of those we're assessing by asking them fairly concrete items for them to rate on a scale of 0 to 100 about saying, you can see that we try to have 3 items or 4 for each aspect of their rating. So for each those items combined to provide overall scale ratings for the extent to which they believe their practice matches the confident practice. So in this case we found that from pre to post across our training, which goes on for about 5 months. So we like to think of the training overall as kind of like enrolling in a semester of college or something like that. And that's kind of how we phrase it to people. So there's sort of periodic meetings across that time. And again, also this is consistent with learning, which does indeed take time. So we found every aspect of the training. People themselves felt that their competency had gone up between the pre and post measure. Then we also have a similar thing where we are looking, and I would say that one of the luxuries or the advantages to having this kind of approach where we are using the video to provide feedback is that we also have the video that we have scored for practice. So we use it as an assessment of practice ability or fidelity. And so what we're looking here again at the same set of kind of key areas or elements that we're assessing when we look at the videos. And if you remember back to the VCP screenshot, there was sort of prompting on the right for rating and comments for each of these different areas as our coaches are coding to give feedback to the participants. So we have their sort of very early video versus late video, again showing that there was significant improvement across each of these different areas. Statistically speaking, it was significant. So we were very pleased to see that. That gives us the indication that not only do they think that they're improving, but we also think they're improving. I think what's interesting, this is a little bit more complicated, but it's the next slide. It does get to, if you remember back when I was spending a fair amount of time talking about, do people's perceptions of their competence match kind of what their actual competence might be, and so this study actually gives us kind of an ideal opportunity to examine that question because we have their self-ratings and we have our ratings. So this is just looking at from the first set of data, looking at before we had done much training. And if we think of, again, we had them rating themselves on a kind of 0 to 100 and somewhat arbitrarily put that red line there at 80%, which, you know, I think most people think of as sort of a B or pretty good practice. And it also sort of fell a little bit about where you might expect to see in terms of the distribution. So people who were to the left of that rated themselves below 80%, and about 2/3 of the people put themselves to the right of that at above 80%. But then if you also plot on the y-axis looking at the green line, which is our assessment of competent practice, which we also kind of think of as about a B, and what we would like to see people doing at least kind of B-level practice by the time they finish. Now remember, this is prior to starting. So what you'll see is that by their ratings, everybody to the right of the red line was doing well, doing kind of acceptable or competent practice, whereas from our ratings of the video, it was really just kind of one person and a few more who were close to doing our benchmark level of practice. And of course, maybe that's understandable because we hadn't taught them the intervention yet. On the other hand, these skills that we're looking for as far as being youth-driven and being strengths-based are things that most people have had some level of exposure to already, and in a lot of cases have had some training on as well. So what we're seeing is, if you think about it in a different way, the kind of upper right quadrant is where we agree that they're doing a great job and they agree they're doing a great job or competent. And the lower left is where both we and they are in agreement that they're not doing such a great job. The lower right quadrant is places where people think they're doing pretty well, and in some cases we think they're doing really not so well, all the way up to kind of marginally almost at that benchmark. And what that line is there is the trend line of correlation. It wasn't significant correlation. It was small, so and in the right direction, so that means that there's some degree of agreement between us and them about who's doing well versus not so well. But overall in our studies, just sort of reconfirming the idea that relying on people's own assessments of how well they're doing stuff is not particularly reliable, and probably not a desirable way to go as far as identifying their needs for training and coaching. Next, please. So what we also did, now this is a bunch of stuff plotted on the same scale because we asked people in our training evaluations a lot of questions that are on a 0 to 10 scale, where 0 is kind of worst or terrible or horrible, disorganized, etc., and 10 is great, fabulous, confident, etc. So they're all on the same scale, but the questions are somewhat different. Basically 0 is bad and 10 is good. And what we found was across the training, a lot of stuff kind of stayed the same, and in a lot of cases this was good stuff. So if you look at sort of, they thought the training goals were really important, and that was above a 9 on a 10-point scale, which is really high, both at the beginning and at the end. They found the trainers very credible, again very close to kind of 9 on average, both at the beginning and end, not significantly different. Training was well organized, interest was a little bit lower, but still right around just 7.5 to 8. What was interesting here, and then impact you'll see also stayed pretty high, that their confidence in applying the training in their real practice setting actually went up significantly, so that it was almost right around 9 by the end of the training. It started high, but it went higher, which is good. Then you can also see that people rate, I'm just going back up to the top again because it's slightly different, rating their mastery before of the kind of key competencies before AMP as sort of lower in the beginning, and then that their current mastery higher later on. Not surprising. So kind of taken as a package, we feel like that reflects pretty well on our training, and we have feel that we are engaged in the training. We feel like we can see people growing from time to time, from the beginning to the end as far as their skills go, that it's very concrete, it's very obvious, and also that they are satisfied and feel that they are gaining in skill as well. So that kind of brings us, I think, to the end of our formal presentation, and we're hoping that we have some time for some quick questions. I myself cannot see the questions. Emily, do we have questions?
At this point, if any participants want to add questions, that would be welcome. We do have a few minutes. So far, there's one question submitted early on. The participant asked, how do I get my coworkers to buy into the youth we work with? I don't know if that's something you want to address, Janet.
Well, that sounds like a training issue, and I'm not sure buy into the youth. Maybe that's sort of have a more appreciative and strengths-based approach. I think that maybe not having a high level of confidence in young people and their ability to make good decisions for their lives is a really widespread phenomenon, and it's not necessarily a surprise given that we know these are young people who may be involved in some risky behaviors or have some actual serious mental health concerns. So I think that's where you see the need for this kind of training, which is to provide people with something that addresses their concerns while also permitting them to work in a youth-driven way. And I have to say that as we were developing our Achieve My Plan interventions, that was certainly something that we felt we had to put a lot of attention on, because we want, obviously, everybody to stay safe. We want everybody not to be anxious about how things are going. Yet at the same time, we want young people to be able to exercise their self-determination. And I think that's kind of a very complicated question, but it's a huge part of what we focus on with our Achieve My Plan. And I think only when you can kind of resolve that, that's the only time these kind of interventions are really going to work, because otherwise people are nervous about maybe giving too much decision making to young people, and we need to protect them more. We need to make sure they're making the right choices. So that's kind of gets to the content of the training, and again then we have to be able to support people to learn how to negotiate that, which can be a fairly fine balance between making sure things are going well and not trying to be too directive as far as telling young people what to do, because we know that sort of backfires.
Thank you, Janet. Well, it looks like we are at the end of our hour, and we don't have further questions right now, so I think we will end here. And I just want to thank you, Janet, Celeste, and Mary Beth, for your presentation today, and thank you to all of our participants for your time. I want to remind you that our slides and recording will be available on our site soon, and you can please participate in future things with us. Thank you so much.